Trench warfare in World War I was employed primarily on the Western Front, an area of northern France and Belgium that saw combat between German troops and Allied forces from France, Great Britain, and, later, the United States. Although trenches were hardly new to combat, prior to the advent of firearms and artillery, they were used as defenses against attacks, such as moats surrounding castles. But they became a fundamental part of the strategy with the influx of modern weapons of war. Long, narrow trenches dug into the ground at the front, usually by the infantry soldiers who would occupy them for weeks at a time, were designed to protect troops from machine gun fire and artillery attacks from the air. As the Great War also saw the wide use of chemical warfare and poison gas, the trenches were thought to offer some degree of protection against exposure. While significant exposure to militarized chemicals such as mustard gas would result in almost certain death, many of the gases used in the war were still relatively weak. Thus, trenches may have afforded some protection by allowing soldiers more time to take other defensive steps, such as putting on gas masks. In today's video, we're going to explore 3 reasons why trenches and trench warfare were so brutal. The question is, do you think you would be capable of surviving? Number 1. The living conditions in a trench in the First World War were awful to say the least. Even for the time period, you would have rather been anywhere else in the world than a trench in the middle of a brutal war. Rats and lice tormented the troops day and night. Oversized rats, bloated by the food and waste of stationary armies, helped spread disease and were a constant irritant. In 1918, doctors also identified lice as the cause of trench fever, which plagued the troops with headaches, fevers, and muscle pain. The unsanitary conditions of trench life, especially the cold and persistent dampness, resulted in trench foot, a frostbite-like infection that in extreme cases led to gangrene and amputation. Not to mention the fact that soldiers were constantly relieving themselves near and in the very places they were stuck in for sometimes months on end. Number 2. Random attacks were common while in a trench. If an enemy attacked on foot, it was quite easy to mow them down with machine guns as they pushed forward towards you. The real worry was the constant threat of artillery barrages and gas attacks. A barrage may involve a few or many artillery batteries. Typically, each gun in a barrage, using indirect fire, will fire continuously at a steady rate at its assigned point for an assigned time before moving on to the next target. Even with the inaccuracy of artillery in the Great War, just imagine constant, mind-numbingly loud explosions going off in all directions around you. If the artillery was accurate and was on target near or where you were entrenched, it was almost certain death for you and everyone around you. One of the enduring hallmarks of the First World War was the large-scale use of chemical weapons, commonly called gas. Although chemical warfare caused less than 1% of the total deaths in this war, the psychological terror it had on soldiers was formidable. Mustard gas was the worst of the chemical weapons in World War I. If victims were exposed to the gas, it would irritate and burn the skin. If inhaled, it would cause the lungs to fill up with fluids. Although most survived gas attacks, it had lasting effects on soldiers, and psychological fear was developed to these attacks. Number 3. At least initially in World War I, forces mounted attacks from the trenches with bayonets fixed to their rifles by climbing over the top edge into what was known as no man's land. The area between opposing forces, usually in a single, straight line and under a barrage of gunfire. Imagine hearing a superior officer blow the whistle, knowing you have to climb out of what safety you had and charge into often open fields of mud and rainwater filled with dead bodies rotting. The only cover you might have are craters from artillery impacts. As you see fellow comrades getting gunned down as you get closer and closer, you are now engaged with constant machine gun fire. If you manage to get to the enemy trench, you are now fighting to the death with single-shot rifles with bayonets. Knives and even swords were often resorted to as ammunition would run out, and fist fighting was even commonplace. If you think you would have survived the trench life of the Great War, let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. We upload multiple videos a week on anything history.